Hi, and welcome to my 3 a.m. diaries. Today, I wanted to share my thoughts on an article that I read a few years ago that I absolutely loved. Like, it had such a big impact on me, and I've been sharing it with friends ever since. Essentially, what I loved about it, or the big impact it had on me, is it taught me how to be mindful about how I thought, felt, and reacted to what people said and did. It was all about not getting easily offended. Now, don't get me wrong, there are people who say and do things and their intention is to offend. And where offense is meant, offense will be taken for sure. Yeah. And that's where we set our boundaries. However, for the most part, we do walk around being offended by things that were not meant to be offensive because we we live in our bubbles and we are egotistical and we're very full of ourselves and think everything is about us. But this article taught me that not everything is about you. So without going too much into me waffling on, let me read a few points of why this article really meant so much to me, or why it's been one of the things that I hold to and go back to often, right? So it's by Dr. Jody Prinzavelli. So it starts, there's an ancient and well-kept secret to happiness which the great ones have known for centuries. They rarely talk about it, but they use it all the time, and it is fundamental to good mental health. The secret is called the fine art of not being offended. In order to truly master this art, one must be able to see that every statement, action, and reaction of another human being is the sum result of their total life experience to date. In other words, the majority of people in our world say and do what they do from their own sets of fears, conclusions, defenses, and attempts to survive. Most of it, even when it's aimed directly at us, has nothing to do with us. Usually, it has more to do with all the other times, and in particular, the first few times that this person experienced a similar situation, and usually when they were young. Those few sentences really got me. Like, I had to read them over and over again and go like, what? Really? As in, I don't know. They were just so, these words were just so potent. Like, every reaction of another human being is the sum result of their total experience to date. And they're usually referencing something else that happened to them and equating it to what's happening with you right now. Right? Anyway, let's continue. So, all that said, almost nothing is personal. Even with our closest loved ones, our partners, our children, and our friends, we are all swimming in the projections and filters of each other's life experiences. And often we are just the stand ins, the chess pieces of life which our loved ones have their own built in reactions. This is not to dehumanize life or take away the intimacy from our relationships, but mainly for us to know that almost every time we get offended, we are actually just in a misunderstanding. Again, another gem right there. Almost every time we get offended, we are just in a misunderstanding. A true embodiment of this idea actually allows for more intimacy and less suffering throughout all of our relationships. When we know that we are just the ones who happen to be standing in the right place at the right psychodynamic time for someone to say or do what they're doing, we don't have to take life personally. If it weren't us, it would likely be somebody else. This frees us to be a little more detached from the reactions of people around us. How often do we react to a statement of another by being offended rather than seeing that maybe that person might be hurting? In fact, every time we get offended, It's actually an opportunity to extend kindness to one who may be suffering, even if they themselves do not appear that way on the outside. All anger, all acting out, all harshness, all criticism, in truth, is a form of suffering. And this also, yet another mind-blowing idea that hurting people hurt people. And that's just an example right there. So the article goes on to say, when we prove no Velcro for all the above to stick, something changes in the world. We do not even have to say a thing. In fact, it's usually better not to say a thing. People who are suffering on the inside but not showing it on the outside are not usually keen for someone to point it out to them. We do not have to be our loved ones' therapists, right? We only need to understand the situation and move on. In the least, we ourselves experience less suffering, and at best, we have a chance to make the world a better place. This is also not to be confused with our allowing ourselves to be hurt, neglected, or taken advantage of. True compassion does not allow harm to ourselves. But when we know that nothing is personal, a magical thing happens. Many of the seeming abusers of the world start to live our lives. Once we are conscious, so-called abuse can only happen if we believe what the other is saying. Right? And when we know nothing is personal, we also end up not feeling abused. We can only say, thank you for sharing, and move on. We are not hooked by what another does or says, since we know it's not about us. So I'm gonna leave it there and I'll share the article. But how powerful is that? The fine art of not being easily offended. Talk to you later. Ciao.